You don't belong in first class. This ticket must be fraudulent." The words hit the air like a slap, echoing through the crowded gate area of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Flight attendant Melissa Rodriguez stood behind the boarding scanner at gate A12, her navy blue uniform pressed to perfection, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't being discreet. She said it loud enough for the entire boarding area to hear. The woman standing in front of her didn't flinch. Dr. Zoe Williams, 38, African-American, dressed in comfortable dark jeans, a soft gray cashmere sweater, and white sneakers, looked like any other passenger preparing for a long flight. Her shoulder-length, natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face makeup-free, her only jewelry a simple watch and small gold earrings. In her hand, she carried a well-worn leather messenger bag containing her laptop and research papers. In her other hand, a first-class boarding pass for SkyWave Airlines Flight 447 to Boston. What Melissa Rodriguez didn't know was that she had just accused the owner and CEO of SkyWave Airlines of fraud. Before we dive deeper into this story of prejudice, power, and accountability, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe every passenger deserves dignity regardless of how they're dressed, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Stories like this need to be heard. Now back to Gate A12, where a moment of casual racism was about to trigger a corporate earthquake. The morning had started normally for Dr. Zoe Williams. She'd arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor 2 hours early for her 10:15 a.m. flight to Boston, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at MIT's annual Biomedical Engineering Conference. Her presentation on revolutionary cardiac monitoring technology had the potential to save thousands of lives annually. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was just another black woman being told she didn't belong. "Excuse me," Zoe said, her voice calm but firm. "Did you just say my ticket is fraudulent?" Melissa's eyes swept over Zoe again, taking in the casual attire, the messenger bag instead of expensive luggage, the lack of designer labels. In her 8 years as a flight attendant, Melissa had developed what she considered a sixth sense for spotting passengers who didn't belong in premium cabins. And everything about this woman screamed coach passenger trying to scam her way forward. "Ma'am," Melissa said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "our scanner is having trouble reading your pass. Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Sometimes passengers get confused with their connecting flights. Behind Melissa, junior flight attendant Brandon Walsh, 28, watched the interaction with growing discomfort. He'd seen Melissa pull this routine before, always with passengers who didn't fit her mental image of first-class travelers. Usually those passengers were people of color. He'd never said anything. He'd told himself it wasn't his place, that Melissa had more experience, that maybe she really could spot fraudulent tickets. But watching her now, seeing the barely concealed smirk on her face as she held up the boarding process, Brandon felt a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't about scanner problems. This was about something uglier. "The gate is correct," Zoe replied evenly. "Flight 447 to Boston, seat 2A. My name is Williams." She slid her ID across the counter along with the boarding pass. Melissa picked up the documents with exaggerated care as if they might contaminate her fingers. She studied the ID for a long moment, comparing the photo to Zoe's face with theatrical scrutiny. Melissa muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The scanner still isn't recognizing this, and frankly, some of these documents look questionable. That's when the first witness began paying attention. Maria Santos, 25, a travel blogger from San Diego, looked up from her phone. She'd been documenting her cross-country trip for her Instagram followers when she heard the commotion at the boarding desk. As a Latina who'd faced her own share of discrimination while traveling, something about the flight attendant's tone immediately set off alarm bells. Maria quietly opened her Instagram app and started recording. "This is Maria at Phoenix Airport," she whispered into her phone. and I think we're about to witness something really ugly. Tommy Liu, a 30-year-old software engineer from Seattle, was scrolling through Reddit when he heard the flight attendant's accusatory tone. He looked up to see a black woman standing calmly at the boarding desk, while the flight attendant made a show of examining her documents. Tommy had grown up in a family that taught him to recognize prejudice when he saw it. His parents had faced plenty of discrimination as Chinese immigrants in the 1980s. He knew the playbook: create doubt, demand additional verification, make the victim prove they belong. He discreetly opened his phone's video camera and began recording. "I'm going to need to call my supervisor." "Melissa," announced, reaching for her radio. "We may have a situation here." "What kind of situation?" Zoe asked, her voice remaining level despite the growing attention from other passengers. "Well," Melissa said, lowering her voice just enough to seem concerned while still speaking loud enough for others to hear, "we've had issues with people using stolen credit cards to purchase tickets they can't afford. It's our job to verify everything is legitimate." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Nearby passengers began turning to stare. Some looked uncomfortable. Others curious, a few began reaching for their phones. At Gate A12, the normal pre-boarding buzz had been replaced by an electric tension. Brandon Walsh felt his stomach clench tighter. In his 2 years with SkyWave, he'd never seen Melissa question a white passenger's ticket this thoroughly. Never seen her call for a supervisor over scanner problems. Never seen her suggest a passenger might be using stolen credit cards. But he'd seen her do exactly this to passengers of color 3 times in the past 6 months. And he'd said nothing. Each time. Patricia Henderson, a 55-year-old frequent business traveler from Denver, watched the scene unfold from her position in the priority boarding line. As a white woman who'd flown first class dozens of times, she'd never once been asked to prove her ticket was legitimate. Never once been subjected to this kind of scrutiny. The difference in treatment was so obvious it made her physically uncomfortable. But like Brandon, she said nothing. She told herself it wasn't her business, that maybe there really was a scanner problem, that maybe the flight attendant knew things she didn't. Zoe reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her phone. She sent a quick text message. "It's happening again. Phoenix Airport. Gate A12. Activate Protocol 7. 300 miles away in SkyWave's corporate headquarters in Los Angeles. Executive Assistant Nina Thompson felt her secure phone buzz. She read the message and immediately stood up from her desk. Protocol 7 was code for discrimination incident involving the CEO. Nina had hoped she'd never have to use it. She dialed a number from memory. "Marcus, it's Nina. We have a Code 7 situation. Phoenix Airport Gate. A12. Yes, sir. Right away." Back at the gate, Supervisor Stephen Parker arrived, a 40-year-old man whose rumpled uniform and harried expression suggested he lived in a constant state of putting out fires. Melissa quickly whispered her version of events: suspicious passenger, questionable documents, possible fraud. Stephen looked at Zoe, taking in her casual appearance, and nodded to Melissa. In his 15 years with various airlines, he'd learned to trust his flight attendant's instincts. If Melissa suspected fraud, there was probably fraud. "Ma'am," Stephen said, his tone suggesting he was doing Zoe a favor. "I understand there's some confusion about your ticket. Why don't we step aside and get this sorted out? I'm sure it's just a simple misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Zoe replied. "I have a valid ticket for seat 2A. I've shown my ID." "What exactly is the problem?" Stephen exchanged a glance with Melissa. He'd dealt with difficult passengers before. The best approach was usually to wear them down, make them feel like the problem was theirs to solve, not the airline's. "Well," he said, pulling out his tablet, "our scanner is indicating some irregularities with your booking. The credit card used for purchase isn't showing up in our verification system. And frankly, first-class tickets are quite expensive. Are you sure you didn't mean to book economy?" The insult was wrapped in customer service language, but it was an insult nonetheless. Stephen was suggesting that Zoe couldn't afford the ticket she was holding, that someone like her had no business in first class. Maria Santos, still recording on Instagram, felt her anger rising. She'd heard similar suggestions during her own travels. The assumption that people of color were somehow in the wrong place, somehow trying to get something they hadn't earned. "This is discrimination," she said loud enough for her followers to hear. "I'm watching blatant racial profiling happen in real time at Phoenix Airport." Tommy Lou had switched from video to live streaming on Reddit. His post titled, "Airline Employee Refusing to Board Black Passenger" was already gaining viewers and comments. "She's got all her documents," Tommy narrated quietly. "ID, boarding pass, everything. But they keep finding new reasons why she can't board." Patricia Henderson watched the circle of phones appearing around the gate. Part of her wanted to intervene to say something about the obvious difference in how this passenger was being treated. But she stayed silent, telling herself she didn't have all the facts. Zoe looked around at the growing crowd of passengers, many now holding phones, some clearly recording. She'd been in this position before. At 24, fresh out of her doctoral program, she'd tried to check into a boutique hotel in Atlanta after a red-eye flight. Dressed in sweats and exhausted from travel, she'd been told by the desk clerk that she didn't look like someone who'd stay here. When she'd insisted on her confirmed reservation, security had been called. She'd spent that night sleeping in her car. The next morning, she'd started planning the business that would eventually become SkyWave Airlines. She'd promised herself that she'd build a company where no one would ever face what she'd faced. Standing at Gate A12 watching Stephen Parker's condescending smile, she realized that promise had been broken, not by outsiders, but by her own employees. "I'd like to speak with someone from corporate," Zoe said quietly. Melissa laughed, actually laughed. "Ma'am, we are corporate. Mr. Parker here is the station supervisor. He has full authority to resolve passenger issues." "And I'm resolving it," Stephen said with finality. "You can either take the next available economy seat, or we can book you on a later flight. But you're not boarding this aircraft in first class with questionable documentation." That's when Captain Jake Morrison, 45, emerged from the jet bridge to see what was causing the boarding delay. A veteran pilot with 20 years of experience, Jake had seen every kind of passenger disturbance imaginable. But something about this situation felt different. The passenger in question wasn't yelling or making demands. She was standing calmly while his crew made a scene around her. "What's the delay?" he asked Stephen. "Passenger with fraudulent documents trying to board first class," Stephen replied immediately. Jake looked at Zoe, then at the crowd of passengers holding phones, then at the obvious tension radiating from his flight crew. In his experience, real fraudsters usually made a scene and then disappeared when challenged. This passenger was doing the opposite. She was standing her ground calmly, which suggested she actually belonged exactly where she was. "Have you run her credit card?" Jake asked. Stephen paused. "Well, no, but the scanner." "Run the card," Jake said simply. Maria Santos's Instagram live stream had reached over 5,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in. "This is disgusting, sue them. I'm never flying this airline. Someone needs to post this everywhere." Tommy's Reddit stream was gaining even more traction. Cross-posted to multiple subreddits, it was approaching 10,000 viewers as people shared the link across social media platforms. Update. "Captain just arrived," Tommy narrated. He's asking questions the crew doesn't want to answer. Patricia Henderson watched Captain Morrison's intervention and felt a spark of hope. Finally, someone in authority was asking the right questions. Maybe this nightmare would end soon. But Stephen Parker wasn't ready to back down. He'd committed to his position, and reversing course now would make him look foolish. Instead, he doubled down. "Sir, with respect, this passenger has been uncooperative and evasive. Given the security climate we operate in, I think we need to err on the side of caution. It was a master class in bureaucratic intimidation. Rap discrimination in security language, and suddenly the victim becomes the threat. Zoe felt the familiar weight of other people's prejudices settling on her shoulders. She'd carried this weight her entire life, in graduate school where professors assumed she was affirmative action, in business meetings where clients asked to speak to her supervisor, in restaurants where hosts suggested she'd be more comfortable at the bar than at a reserved table. But this was different. This wasn't just personal. This was her company. Her employees were discriminating against her in front of cameras that would carry this moment across the internet. The damage wouldn't just be to her dignity. It would be to every passenger who'd ever faced similar treatment, to every employee who'd worked to build SkyWave's reputation, to every investor who'd trusted her vision. She pulled out her phone again and speed-dialed a number. "Nina," she said quietly when the line connected. "I need immediate executive intervention at Gate A12. Full documentation and recording. And Nina, get legal on standby. We're going to need them." Stephen Parker saw her making the call and felt a flicker of concern. Most passengers in her position would be arguing, pleading, or storming off. This passenger was making calm professional phone calls. It was unusual. "Ma'am, who exactly are you calling?" he asked. Zoe looked at him directly for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Someone who's going to be very interested in how SkyWave employees treat their passengers." Melissa Rodriguez felt her first real twinge of doubt. Something about the passenger's confidence was unsettling, but she'd gone too far to back down now. Admitting she was wrong would mean admitting she'd discriminated. Better to see it through and hope corporate backed her up. "Look," Melissa said, "we're trying to help you here. There's clearly been some kind of mix-up with your booking. The best thing to do is step aside, let us contact reservations and get this sorted out properly." "I am stepped aside," Zoe replied. "I'm standing exactly where you told me to stand. What I'm not doing is giving up a seat I paid for because you've decided I don't deserve it." The words hung in the air like an accusation, because that's exactly what they were. Tommy Lou's Reddit stream had exploded. Comments were now coming in faster than he could read them. "She needs to sue them into bankruptcy. This is why I drive everywhere. Someone please tell me this is going viral. What airline is this? I'm never flying them again." Maria Santos was fielding similar comments on Instagram. "Girl, get their names. Document everything. This is 2024. How is this still happening? Please tell me someone is recording this properly." Patricia Henderson watched the phone cameras multiply around the gate. This wasn't going to stay contained. This was going to be everywhere by evening, and she was going to be visible in the background saying nothing while discrimination happened in front of her. The thought made her sick. Captain Morrison returned from a quick call to the operations center. He'd asked them to pull up the passenger manifest for his flight. What he'd learned made him very uncomfortable. "Mr. Parker," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." They stepped away from the boarding desk, but Maria's phone caught their hushed conversation. "Jake, what did operations say?" "They said to process her immediately. No questions, full priority treatment." "Why? What's special about her?" "They wouldn't say." "But Stephen?" The tone was serious. Very serious. When they returned to the boarding area, Stephen Parker's demeanor had changed completely. The confident supervisor was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he was calculating career damage. "Ms. Williams," he said carefully, "we've contacted our operations center and they've confirmed your ticket is valid. We apologize for any confusion." But Melissa Rodriguez wasn't ready to give up. She'd built her identity around being the flight attendant who protected first class from inappropriate passengers. Backing down now felt like admitting her entire worldview was wrong. "With respect, sir," she said to Stephen, "we still haven't verified the credit card used for purchase. Policy requires process her boarding pass." Captain Morrison interrupted. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd made life and death decisions at 30,000 feet. Now. Zoe stepped forward to the scanner, but before Melissa could process her pass, she spoke one more time. You should know, Zoe said quietly, that everything you've said and done here has been recorded, not just by passengers but by airport security cameras. It's all documented. Every assumption you made, every hoop you made me jump through every suggestion that I didn't belong. She paused, letting that sink in. I hope it was worth it. In the gleaming towers of Century City, Los Angeles, the 37th floor of the Meridian building housed the executive offices of SkyWave Airlines. The corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city and ocean beyond, belonged to the company's founder and CEO. But that office was empty this morning because its occupant was currently standing at Gate A12 in Phoenix being accused of fraud by her own employees. Executive Assistant Nina Thompson sat at her mahogany desk fielding the crisis call she'd hoped would never come. In the 3 years since Dr. Zoe Williams had implemented Protocol 7, Nina had prepared for this moment but prayed it wouldn't arrive. Now, watching live security feeds from Phoenix Airport on her monitor, she felt her heart racing as she witnessed her boss, one of the most brilliant and accomplished women she'd ever met, being publicly humiliated by SkyWave employees. Nina's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up passenger manifests, employee files, and incident reports. What she found made her stomach turn. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Her phone rang. CFO Marcus Rivera. Nina, I just got your message. Please tell me this isn't what I think it is. Marcus, it's exactly what you think it is. Dr. Williams is being denied boarding on her own airline. Gate, a 12 Phoenix. The flight crew is suggesting she can't afford first class. Marcus Rivera, a 42-year-old financial wizard who'd helped build SkyWave from a startup into a major carrier, felt the blood drain from his face. Who's the crew chief, Melissa Rodriguez, 8 years with the company. And Marcus, I'm looking at her file now. 3 complaints in the past 18 months, all involving passengers of color, all buried in HR. The silence on the line was deafening. Then Marcus spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. Get me legal. Get me Diana Walsh from operations. And Nina, start recording everything. We're going to need it. Diana Walsh, head of operations, was in her office reviewing quarterly performance metrics when her assistant burst in without knocking. Ma'am, you have an emergency call from Nina Thompson. She says it's Protocol 7. Diana's blood went cold. Protocol 7 was the code for discrimination incidents involving the CEO. She'd helped develop the protocol herself, working with Dr. Williams to create a rapid response system for exactly this kind of situation. She'd never imagined they'd actually need to use it. She grabbed her secure phone. Nina, what do we have? Diana, Dr. Williams is being denied boarding in Phoenix. The crew is accusing her of fraud. It's being live-streamed by passengers. We're looking at a potential public relations catastrophe. Diana pulled up the flight manifest on her computer. Flight 447 Phoenix to Boston. She found Dr. Williams's booking immediately. Seat 2A, purchased with the corporate account confirmed 3 days ago. Everything was perfectly legitimate. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. The crew chief for Flight 447 was Melissa Rodriguez, and Diana recognized that name. Nina, I need you to pull Melissa Rodriguez's personnel file immediately. Send it to legal to Marcus and to me. Also pull the files for the entire crew. Already done. Diana, it's bad. Melissa has multiple complaints that were never properly investigated. Someone has been burying them. Diana felt the weight of corporate liability settling on her shoulders. Discrimination lawsuits could destroy airlines. Bad publicity could tank stock prices overnight. But more than that, the thought of their CEO being humiliated by their own employees made her sick. Nina, I'm authorizing immediate intervention, whatever it takes to resolve this situation, full executive authority. Back at Gate A12. Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from Nina legal team activated. Recording everything. Corporate response en route. Full support authorized. Zoe smiled grimly. The machine was in motion now, but she wasn't going to wait for corporate rescue. This needed to end here in front of these cameras with these witnesses. The lesson needed to be public and immediate. Marcus Rivera convened an emergency conference call with the senior leadership team. On the line were Nina Thompson, Diana Walsh, General Counsel Sarah Hartman, and VP of Human Resources Michael Park. The topic, how their CEO was being discriminated against by their own employees. Sarah Marcus began, "What's our legal exposure here?" Sarah Hartman, a sharp-eyed attorney who'd handled dozens of discrimination cases, reviewed the preliminary reports on her screen. Marcus, this is a nightmare scenario. Federal civil rights violations, potential punitive damages, SEC disclosure requirements if it impacts stock price. But more importantly, this is being live-streamed. We're not just dealing with a lawsuit. We're dealing with a viral video of our employees discriminating against a black woman. What about criminal liability? Diana asked. If they're detaining her against her will or making false accusations of fraud, we could be looking at false imprisonment charges. Against our own CEO. Michael Park from HR was reviewing employee files. I'm seeing a pattern here with Melissa Rodriguez. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, all involving passengers of color. Somehow these never made it to my desk for proper investigation. How is that possible? Marcus demanded. Someone has been burying them, marking them as resolved without actual resolution. I'm seeing signatures from mid-level managers who claim they investigated, but there's no documentation of actual investigation. Nina Thompson was monitoring social media feeds in real time. Gentlemen, this is spreading fast. Hashtag SkyWave discrimination is trending on Twitter. The Reddit livestream has 50,000 viewers and climbing. We've got maybe an hour before this hits mainstream news. Marcus made the decision that would define how SkyWave handled the crisis. We're not going to hide from this. We're not going to issue a statement and hope it goes away. We're going to own it, fix it, and use it as a turning point. Sarah, what do we need to do legally? Full documentation of the incident. Immediate suspension of involved employees pending investigation. Complete review of all similar complaints. And Marcus, we need to be prepared to terminate people. This can't be handled with sensitivity training. Diana Walsh was already on a second phone coordinating with Phoenix Airport security. I've got our security team pulling all airport footage. Every angle, every conversation. Nothing is going to be disputed later. What about the crew? Marcus asked. The captain seems to be trying to de-escalate. He's not part of the problem, but Melissa Rodriguez and the gate supervisor are doubling down. They're making it worse. Nina looked up from her social media monitoring. The passenger live streaming this just hit 100,000 viewers. CNN is already reaching out for comment. Fox News, MSNBC, they're all picking it up. Marcus Rivera felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. In his career, he'd navigated financial crises, regulatory challenges, competitive pressures. But watching his CEO be humiliated by their own employees while the internet watched was a new kind of corporate nightmare. All right, he said, here's what we're going to do. Diana, I want you personally en route to Phoenix within the hour. Take a full incident response team. Sarah, prepare termination documents for Rodriguez and any supervisors who enabled this pattern. Michael begin a complete audit of HR complaint handling. We're going to find out how deep this goes. What about Dr. Williams? Nina asked. Marcus paused. She can handle herself. She built this company. But when this is over, we're going to make sure it never happens again. Maria Santos had never expected her travel blog live stream to become a civil rights documentation. But watching the obvious discrimination unfolding in front of her camera, she knew she was witnessing something important, something that needed to be preserved and shared. "This is insane," she whispered to her phone, now filming in vertical mode for better mobile viewing. "I've been traveling for 5 years, documenting airlines, hotels, restaurants. I've never seen anything this blatant." Her viewer count had exploded past 5,000 as people shared the stream across Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. The comments were a mix of outrage support and, unfortunately, some defending the airline crew. At Travel Junkie 2024. "Maybe she really doesn't have the right ticket at Social Justice." Warrior. "Are you kidding me? They never would have questioned a white woman like this at Frequent Flyer 99. I fly first class all the time. This is not normal procedure at Phoenix." Local. "What airline is this? I live here and need to know." Maria found her voice as a narrator. "For anyone just joining, a black woman with valid documents is being denied boarding on her own ticket. The flight crew is suggesting she can't afford first class and might be using stolen credit cards. They've called a supervisor who is backing up the discriminatory behavior instead of correcting it. Tommy Lou's Reddit livestream had become the main hub for the incident. His post on r/public freakout had exploded to the top of the subreddit, and cross-posts were appearing on r/racism, r/legal advice, and r/airline problems. The comment threads were becoming digital war zones of debate about discrimination, airline policies, and civil rights. User U/airline worker 2019 commented, "I work for a different airline and this is absolutely not standard procedure. They're profiling her." User U/Devil's Advocate 777 replied, "How do you know she's not actually trying to scam them? Flight crews deal with fraud all the time." User U/Civil Rights Lawyer responded, "Because they're requiring proof from her that they wouldn't require from a white passenger. That's literally the definition of discrimination." Tommy narrated the growing crowd. More passengers are gathering around. People are pulling out their phones. The airline staff looks nervous now. They know this is being recorded from multiple angles. Patricia Henderson stood frozen in the boarding line, watching the scene unfold with growing horror. As a frequent business traveler, she'd been in hundreds of boarding lines, and she'd never once been asked to prove her ticket was legitimate. Never once been subjected to credit card verification. Never once been told she might be more comfortable in a different cabin. The difference in treatment was so stark, it was impossible to ignore, and her silence was making her complicit. Finally, Patricia stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "Excuse me, I travel first class regularly, and I've never been asked to verify my credit card or prove my ticket is legitimate." "What's different about this passenger?" Melissa Rodriguez turned toward Patricia with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, please return to your position in line. We're handling a security issue." "A security issue." Patricia's voice got stronger. "She has a boarding pass and ID. That's more than I usually need to show." What exactly is the security concern? Tommy Lou caught Patricia's intervention on camera. "Oh, snap, another passenger is speaking up. A white woman is calling out the discriminatory treatment." Maria Santos felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone else is saying what we're all thinking. This is discrimination, plain and simple. Other passengers began murmuring among themselves. The circle of phones grew larger. Airport security officers were approaching, but instead of looking at Zoe as a threat, they were looking at the airline staff with concern. Word was spreading through their radios that this incident was being live-streamed and had already reached social media. An elderly black man in the boarding area approached the growing crowd. His name was William Carter, a retired teacher from Phoenix. He'd lived through the civil rights era, seen discrimination in its most overt forms, and recognized what he was witnessing. "Young lady," he said to Zoe, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience, "don't you back down. Don't you let them make you small. We've fought too hard for you to have to prove you belong." His words were caught by multiple cameras, and within minutes, clips of the elderly teacher's statement were being shared across social media with captions like, "Elder speaks truth to power," and "This is why we can't stay silent." Melissa Rodriguez felt the situation slipping away from her. What had started as routine passenger control was becoming a public relations disaster. But pride and prejudice made her double down instead of backing off. "Sir, please step back," she said to William Carter. "You're interfering with airline security procedures." William smiled grimly. "Child, I was fighting for civil rights before you were born. I know the difference between security procedures and discrimination. This is discrimination." While the crowd grew at Gate A12, Nina Thompson was coordinating the corporate response from Los Angeles. She had Diana Walsh on one line, legal counsel on another, and was monitoring multiple social media feeds on her computer screens. The situation was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. "Diana E., TA to Phoenix," Nina asked into her headset. "Wheels up in 15 minutes. But Nina, this can't wait for my arrival. It's already gone national. I'm watching clips on CNN's website." Nina's phone buzzed with a secure message from Dr. Williams. "Nina, time to reveal. Full transparency. Let them connect the dots." Nina understood. Dr. Williams wasn't going to hide behind corporate rescue. She was going to use this moment to expose the discrimination and hold her own employees accountable in the most public way possible. Nina began executing the revelation protocol. First, she updated Dr. Williams's passenger profile in the system to show her full title and position. Then she sent an encrypted message to Phoenix Airport security with instructions to treat this as an executive protection matter. Finally, she placed a call to Captain Morrison's direct line. "Captain Morrison, this is Nina Thompson, Executive Assistant to CEO Dr. Zoe Williams. I believe you have her at your gate." There was a long pause. "Ma'am, could you repeat that? The passenger your crew is denying boarding to is Dr. Zoe Williams, founder and CEO of SkyWave Airlines. She owns the company." Captain Morrison felt his world tilt. "Are you certain, Captain, I'm looking at her employee ID photo right now? Seat 2, a first-class Phoenix to Boston. Your boss is being discriminated against by your crew." Jake Morrison hung up and stared at the crowd around the boarding desk. The calm, dignified passenger his crew was harassing was his ultimate boss, the woman who signed his paychecks, the person who could end all their careers with a single phone call. And she wasn't making that call. She was standing there letting them expose themselves completely. Meanwhile, Tommy Liu's Reddit stream had attracted the attention of tech workers across the country. Someone in the comments had posted a link. "Wait, is this the same Dr. Williams from the MIT cardiac device breakthrough?" Another commenter replied, "Holy shit! Google Dr. Zoe Williams, SkyWave Airlines. She's not just a passenger, she's the CEO." The revelation rippled through the comment threads like wildfire. She owns the airline that's discriminating against her. This is about to get very interesting. Someone needs to tell the crew who they're messing with. Plot twist of the century. Maria Santos saw the comments on her Instagram stream and quickly Googled Dr. Williams. Her jaw dropped as she read the bio. Dr. Zoe Williams, founder and CEO of SkyWave Airlines, holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from MIT and has revolutionized cardiac monitoring technology. She founded SkyWave in 2019 after experiencing discrimination in air travel and hospitality industries. "Oh my God," Maria whispered to her camera. "Guys, I just looked her up. She's not just any passenger. She's the CEO of SkyWave Airlines. She owns this airline." The impact was immediate. Social media exploded. #SkyWave. CEO began trending within minutes. CEO experiences discrimination on own. Airline headlines started appearing. News outlets scrambled to confirm the story. Stock market algorithms began flagging SkyWave for potential volatility. Back at Gate A12, the revelation hadn't reached the crew yet. They were still focused on their perceived problem passenger, unaware that they were discriminating against their own boss in front of an audience that now numbered in the hundreds of thousands across multiple platforms. But change was coming, and it was coming fast. Nina Thompson stepped off the jetway at Phoenix Sky Harbor at exactly 1:47 p.m., 3 hours after receiving the protocol. 7 alert. She moved through the terminal like a woman on a mission, her heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor, a leather portfolio in one hand and her phone in the other. Behind her walked 2 members of SkyWave's crisis response team, David Park from Legal Affairs and Jennifer Martinez from Corporate Security. Nina had been Dr. Williams's right hand for 3 years, and in that time she had handled congressional inquiries, FDA approvals, and hostile takeover attempts. But walking toward Gate A12, knowing her brilliant, accomplished boss was being humiliated by their own employees while thousands watched online, Nina felt a cold fury, unlike anything she'd experienced in her professional life. The scene at Gate A12 was even worse than the live streams had conveyed. A crowd of passengers had gathered in a semicircle around the boarding desk. Phones held high voices murmuring with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. At the center of it all stood Dr. Zoe Williams, still calm, still dignified, while Melissa Rodriguez continued her performance of thorough document verification. Nina approached the boarding desk with the bearing of someone accustomed to corporate authority. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the crisp efficiency of executive offices and boardroom decisions. "Excuse me, Nina," said her words cutting through the general murmur. "I'm Nina Thompson, Executive Assistant to Dr. Zoe Williams, CEO and founder of SkyWave Airlines. I believe there's been some confusion about my boss's boarding credentials. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones pivoted toward Nina. Melissa Rodriguez looked up from her theatrical document examination with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry." "What did you say?" Melissa asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. Nina opened her portfolio and withdrew a laminated corporate ID card which she placed on the boarding desk counter. "This is Dr. Zoe Williams," she said, indicating Zoe, "founder and chief executive officer of SkyWave Airlines, the airline you work for, the company that issues your paychecks." Tommy Lou's Reddit stream exploded with comments. "Holy shit, it's true. The CEO's assistant just arrived. This crew is so fired I can't believe what I'm watching." Maria Santos nearly dropped her phone. "Oh my God, she whispered to her Instagram audience. "The CEO's assistant just showed up with corporate ID. This is really happening." Stephen Parker. The gate supervisor stared at the ID card as if it might burst into flames. The photo was unmistakably the woman he'd been telling couldn't afford first class. The woman he'd suggested take economy or a later flight. The woman he'd accused of fraud. "There must be some mistake," he said weakly. Nina's smile was glacial. "The only mistake, Mr. Parker, is the treatment Dr. Williams has received from SkyWave employees today, treatment that has been documented by airport security cameras and broadcast live to over 200,000 viewers across multiple platforms." Brandon Walsh, the junior flight attendant, felt his legs go weak. He'd watched Melissa discriminate against passengers before and said nothing. Now he realized he'd been watching his boss be discriminated against while he stood by in silence. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And he deserved it. Captain Morrison approached the group, his face grave. "Ma'am," he said to Nina, "I tried to intervene, but I wasn't aware of the passenger's identity." Nina nodded. "Captain Morrison, Dr. Williams speaks very highly of your attempt to de-escalate. However, the fact remains that your crew has violated multiple federal anti-discrimination statutes, company policies, and basic human decency, all while being recorded for posterity." Melissa Rodriguez stared at the corporate ID, then at Zoe, then back at the ID. The magnitude of her mistake was beginning to penetrate her consciousness. She'd not only discriminated against a passenger, she'd discriminated against the CEO, the person who could fire everyone at this gate with a phone call. "I didn't know," she said weakly. Dr. Zoe Williams spoke for the first time since Nina's arrival. Her voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence around Gate 12, every word carried. "You didn't know I was the CEO," Zoe said. "But you also didn't know I wasn't. You didn't check my passenger profile. You didn't verify your assumptions. You looked at a black woman in casual clothes and decided she didn't belong in first class. You made that decision based on nothing but prejudice." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Patricia Henderson, the business traveler who had finally spoken up, felt tears in her eyes. She'd watched discrimination happen and nearly stayed silent. How many times had she stayed silent in the past? William Carter, the retired teacher, nodded slowly. "That's the truth right there. It wasn't about who you were. It was about who they thought you were." Nina Thompson opened her portfolio and withdrew a tablet, which she activated with her fingerprint. "Dr. Williams, this is the complete personnel file for Melissa Rodriguez. Would you like me to read the relevant sections?" Zoe nodded. "Melissa Rodriguez hired August 2016. Performance reviews satisfactory. Customer complaints. 7 formal complaints in the past 18 months, all involving passengers of color, all marked as resolved without merit by middle management. None escalated to HR for proper investigation." The crowd around Gate A12 fell silent. Even the airport announcements seemed to pause. Nina continued. May 2023. Complaint from Dr. Marcus Thompson, an African-American orthopedic surgeon who was told his first-class ticket looked suspicious and was asked to prove he could afford the seat. Melissa's face went pale. October 2023. Complaint from Maria Gonzalez, a Latina small business owner who was told she probably wanted economy despite holding a valid first-class boarding pass. Stephen Parker backed away from the counter, realizing his role in enabling a pattern of discrimination. January 2024. Complaint from David Kim, a Korean-American tech executive who was told his ticket was likely fraudulent and was subjected to additional screening not required of white passengers. Nina looked up from the tablet. "Ms. Rodriguez, in each of these cases you required additional documentation from passengers of color that you did not require from white passengers. You questioned their ability to afford first-class seats. You suggested they would be more comfortable in economy. In every case, the passengers' tickets were completely legitimate." Tommy Lou's stream had reached peak viewers. The Reddit thread was being shared across Twitter, Facebook, and news outlets. #SkyWave discrimination and #Zoe Williams were trending nationally. Zoe stepped forward, addressing not just Melissa but the cameras broadcasting the moment. "This isn't about one flight attendant," she said, her voice carrying across the gate area. "This is about a culture that allowed 7 complaints to be buried. A culture where supervisors like Mr. Parker backed discriminatory behavior instead of questioning it. A culture where colleagues like Mr. Walsh watched discrimination happen and said nothing. Brandon Walsh felt every eye in the area turn toward him. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but there was nowhere to hide. Mr. Walsh." Zoe said, her voice not unkind, but absolutely direct. "How many times have you watched Miss Rodriguez treat passengers of color differently than white passengers?" Brandon's voice came out as a whisper. 3 times that I can remember clearly. "And how many times did you report it?" "Never." Why? Brandon struggled for words. I told myself it wasn't my place. that maybe she knew something I didn't, that maybe there really were problems with their tickets. Zoe nodded. That's called willful blindness, Mr. Walsh, when we choose not to see discrimination because addressing it would be uncomfortable or inconvenient. Patricia Henderson stepped forward from the crowd. I almost did the same thing she said, her voice shaky but determined. I watched this whole thing happen and almost said nothing because it wasn't my business. But silence is complicity. William Carter, the retired teacher, spoke up again. "Young man," he said to Brandon, "recognizing your mistakes is the first step. Now you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be going forward." Nina was documenting everything on her tablet. Legal implications, personnel actions, policy failures. The complete breakdown of multiple layers of corporate oversight. Dr. Williams. Nina said legal is recommending immediate termination of Ms. Rodriguez for repeated violations of civil rights statutes and company policy. Mr. Parker is recommended for termination for enabling discrimination and failing to properly investigate complaints. Mr. Walsh is recommended for mandatory retraining and probationary status. Stephen Parker found his voice. "You can't fire us for doing our jobs." Zoe looked at him with something approaching pity. "Mr. Parker, this wasn't your job. Your job was to ensure smooth, dignified boarding for all passengers. Your job was to investigate complaints fairly and thoroughly. Your job was to create an environment where every passenger felt welcome and respected." She paused, letting that sink in. "You failed at your job spectacularly, and you failed while discriminating against your own CEO. That's not a disciplinary matter. That's a termination matter." Diana Walsh arrived at Gate A12 as the confrontation reached its peak. As head of operations, she'd seen her share of passenger incidents, but nothing like this. The sight of her CEO being surrounded by cameras while dealing with discrimination by their own employees was a corporate nightmare beyond imagination. She immediately approached Nina. "Status report, complete documentation of discriminatory treatment, pattern of buried complaints, multiple federal violations, and Diana. It's all been live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of viewers." Diana felt the weight of operational responsibility crushing down on her. This wasn't just a personnel issue anymore. This was a company-defining crisis that would affect everything from stock prices to federal investigations. "Ma'am," she said to Dr. Williams, "I am personally appalled by what happened here today. This is not the company culture we've worked to build." Zoe looked at Diana thoughtfully. "Actually, Diana, this is exactly the company culture we built. We built a culture where complaints could be buried by middle management, where discrimination was labeled as resolved without actual resolution, where employees felt comfortable making assumptions about passengers based on their race." The crowd around Gate A12 had grown to include passengers from other flights' airport employees, and even some media representatives who had rushed to the scene after seeing the viral videos. Maria Santos was providing running commentary to her Instagram audience. "This is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this. The CEO of an airline is holding her own employees accountable for discrimination in real time in front of thousands of witnesses." Tommy Lou's Reddit stream had become the central hub for the incident. Comments were pouring in from airline employees, civil rights activists, and passengers sharing their own discrimination stories. "I work for Delta, and we would never treat a passenger like this. This happened to me last year, and the airline did nothing. Finally, accountability in real time. She's handling this perfectly. Calm, professional, devastating." Captain Morrison approached Dr. Williams. "Ma'am, I want you to know that I tried to intervene when I realized something was wrong. This doesn't represent the values I try to bring to my position." Zoe nodded. "Captain Morrison, your intervention is noted and appreciated. But I want you to think about something. You intervened when you realized something was operationally wrong. I want you to intervene in the future when something is morally wrong, even if the operations manual doesn't tell you to." Jake Morrison felt the weight of that distinction. He'd been focused on procedures and protocols when he should have been focused on human dignity. "Understood, ma'am. It won't happen again." Nina was fielding calls from corporate headquarters. Dr. Williams Marcus Rivera is requesting immediate authorization for company-wide policy changes. Legal wants to know about federal reporting requirements. HR wants to begin the termination process immediately. Zoe raised her hand for silence. The crowd around Gate A12 fell quiet, phones still recording everyone waiting for her response. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a company from nothing. "Ms. Rodriguez, your employment with SkyWave Airlines is terminated effective immediately. Mr. Parker, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Mr. Walsh, you are suspended pending completion of comprehensive anti-discrimination training and evaluation." The crowd murmured, but Zoe wasn't finished. "More importantly, SkyWave Airlines is implementing immediate changes. Every complaint of discrimination will be investigated by our executive team personally. Every employee will complete updated bias training within 60 days. Every passenger interaction will be reviewed for equity and fairness." She looked directly into the cameras. "And we're establishing a passenger dignity fund, $5 million to support travelers who face discrimination across the industry. Because this isn't just about SkyWave. This is about an industry-wide problem that requires industry-wide solutions." As airport security escorted Melissa Rodriguez and Stephen Parker away from the gate, the immediate crisis began to wind down. The crowd of passengers slowly dispersed, many still talking about what they'd witnessed. But for the individuals involved, the real reckoning was just beginning. Melissa walked through the terminal in a daze, her SkyWave ID badge already deactivated her uniform, feeling like a costume from a play she no longer understood. 8 years of her life gone because she couldn't see past her own prejudices. Worse, she was becoming a symbol of everything wrong with customer service viral infamy that would follow her forever. Stephen Parker sat in his car in the employee parking garage, staring at his phone as news alerts popped up about the incident. His name was already appearing in articles about airline discrimination. His LinkedIn profile was being screenshotted and shared. His career in aviation was over-ended by his decision to back discrimination instead of investigating it. Brandon Walsh remained at the gate, formally suspended, but permitted to witness the remainder of the incident as part of his educational process. He watched Dr. Williams board the aircraft she owned, treated with the respect she should have received from the beginning, and felt the full weight of his complicity in discrimination. Tommy Lou ended his Reddit livestream after 4 hours, exhausted by documenting injustice, but energized by witnessing accountability. His stream had been viewed by over 500,000 people and shared across every major platform. He'd accidentally become a citizen journalist, and the responsibility felt both heavy and important. Maria Santos concluded her Instagram documentation with a reflection for her followers. "Today, I watched something I never expected to see. Real-time accountability for discrimination. Dr. Zoe Williams could have revealed her identity immediately and stopped the mistreatment. Instead, she let it play out, completely documenting every moment so that the discrimination couldn't be denied or minimized." Patricia Henderson boarded her flight to Denver with a new understanding of the power of speaking up. She'd almost stayed silent while discrimination happened in front of her. The thought that she might have been complicit through inaction would stay with her, but so would the knowledge that she'd finally found her voice when it mattered. William Carter, the retired teacher, shook Dr. Williams's hand before she boarded. "Young lady, he said you handled that with more grace than I had at your age. You turned a moment of humiliation into a moment of education. That's leadership." Nina Thompson completed her documentation as Flight 447 finally pushed back from the gate 3 hours delayed, but carrying a passenger who had just changed her company forever. The legal implications would take months to fully resolve, but the moral implications were crystal clear. Discrimination would not be tolerated, especially not in their own workplace. As the aircraft climbed into the Arizona sky bound for Boston, where Dr. Williams would deliver her keynote on cardiac innovation, the ripple effects of Gate A12 were already spreading across the internet through news organizations and into corporate boardrooms across the country. The SkyWave corporate headquarters in Los Angeles had been transformed into a crisis command center by the time Dr. Williams's flight reached cruising altitude. Every department head was either physically present or connected via video conference, and the energy in the building crackled with the urgency of a company confronting its own failures in real time. Marcus Rivera stood before the assembled executives, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from the day's events. Behind him, wall-mounted screens displayed social media feeds, news coverage, and most damning of all, a continuously updated counter showing the viewership numbers for the viral videos from Gate A12. The count had passed 2 million and showed no signs of slowing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice heavy with the weight of corporate responsibility. "Today, our company experienced a fundamental failure of values. Our CEO was discriminated against by our own employees, and that discrimination was broadcast to the world. We have exactly one choice in how we respond: complete transparency and immediate action." Sarah Hartman, General Counsel, addressed the legal implications. "The federal investigation is inevitable. The Department of Transportation will be reviewing all our passenger complaint records. The EEOC will want to examine our employment practices. But more than that, we're facing potential class action lawsuits from every passenger who has experienced similar discrimination on our flights." Michael Park from HR had spent the afternoon conducting an emergency audit of complaint handling procedures. His findings were devastating. "We've identified at least 15 complaints in the past 2 years that were marked as resolved without proper investigation. All involved passengers of color. All were buried by middle management who prioritized avoiding problems over addressing discrimination." Diana Walsh pulled up operational data on the main screen. "Here's what we're implementing immediately. Every passenger complaint now goes directly to executive review. Every customer service interaction is recorded and randomly audited. Every employee undergoes bias training within 30 days, not annually." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the changes sank in. This wasn't corporate window dressing or sensitivity training. This was fundamental restructuring of how SkyWave interacted with passengers. "What about the financial impact?" asked Jennifer Liu, Vice President of Finance. Marcus pulled up preliminary stock analysis. "We're down 12% in after-hours trading. That's roughly $200 million in market capitalization. But here's the thing. Companies that handle discrimination crises well often see long-term gains in customer loyalty and brand value. Companies that handle them poorly never recover." Dr. Williams had made it clear in a conference call from 37,000 feet, this wasn't about damage control. This was about becoming the airline that other airlines would have to measure themselves against when it came to passenger dignity and civil rights. "The Passenger Dignity Fund isn't a legal settlement," she had explained to the executive team. "It's a statement of values. We're putting our money where our principles should have been all along." Nina Thompson, participating via video conference from Phoenix, outlined the implementation timeline. "Bias training begins next week. New complaint procedures go live Monday. The Passenger Dignity Fund will be announced at Dr. Williams' MIT keynote tomorrow, along with the full video of today's incident and our response." The decision to release the complete footage was controversial, but unanimous. Rather than letting edited clips control the narrative, SkyWave would own their mistake completely and demonstrate their commitment to change transparently. Melissa Rodriguez sat in her small apartment in Tempe, watching news coverage of her own termination. The reporters didn't use her name, but anyone who knew her would recognize the flight attendant terminated for discrimination in the stories. Her phone had been buzzing with calls from former colleagues, family members, and reporters, but she hadn't answered any of them. The hardest part wasn't the job loss, or even the public humiliation. It was the slowly dawning realization that she had become exactly the kind of person she'd once criticized. Growing up as a Latina in Arizona, she'd faced her own share of discrimination and prejudice. She'd promised herself she'd never make others feel the way she'd been made to feel. Somewhere along the way, that promise had been broken. Instead of using her experiences to build empathy, she'd used her position of authority to exercise the same prejudices that had once targeted her. She'd become a gatekeeper instead of a bridge. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her mother. "Mija," her mother said in Spanish. "I saw the news." "What happened?" Melissa found herself crying as she tried to explain, not from self-pity, but from shame. "Mama, I became someone I don't recognize. I treated a passenger badly because of how she looked, and it turns out she was the CEO. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that I was wrong to treat her that way even if she wasn't the CEO. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know, Mama." "I really don't know." Stephen Parker faced similar reckoning in his own life. His wife, a middle school teacher, had watched the video coverage with growing horror. "Steve," she said as he sat at their kitchen table, "is this really who you are? Because the man in that video isn't the man I married." Stephen had been telling himself all afternoon that he'd just been backing up his employee following company protocol doing his job. But watching the footage, seeing his own face as he dismissed Dr. Williams's legitimate concerns and enabled Melissa's discrimination, he couldn't maintain those justifications. I was afraid he admitted to his wife. Afraid of making waves, afraid of being wrong, afraid of standing up for what was right if it meant contradicting someone else. And because I was afraid, I became part of something ugly. Brandon Walsh had the opportunity that Melissa and Stephen didn't a chance at redemption. His suspension was accompanied by mandatory enrollment in an intensive program on bias recognition and intervention. But more than that, he was assigned to work directly with Dr. Williams' office on developing new training protocols for airline employees. His first assignment was to write a detailed account of every incident he'd witnessed but failed to report. Not for punishment, but for education. His experiences would become case studies in how discrimination flourishes when good people stay silent. Mr. Walsh. Dr. Williams had told him during a video call from Boston, "You have a choice now. You can let shame paralyze you, or you can use your mistakes to help others avoid making the same ones. The only way your silence yesterday becomes meaningful is if it leads to courage tomorrow." Tommy Lou found himself thrust into an unexpected role as a digital civil rights documentarian. His Reddit stream had been picked up by news organizations, civil rights groups, and academic researchers studying discrimination in transportation. Major media outlets were reaching out for interviews, and his inbox was flooded with messages from other passengers who'd experienced similar treatment. "I just pointed my camera and pressed record," he told a CNN reporter. "I didn't expect to document history, but maybe that's how real change happens. One person at a time deciding not to look away." Maria Santos leveraged her suddenly massive social media following to create a platform for travel discrimination stories. Her Instagram account became a clearinghouse for passengers sharing their experiences and airlines announcing policy changes. She'd accidentally become an industry watchdog, and she embraced the responsibility. "Travel should be about getting from point A to point B with dignity intact," she wrote in a viral post. "When airlines fail to provide that dignity, we have to document it, share it, and demand better." Patricia Henderson returned to Denver with a completely different perspective on her frequent business travel. She began noticing things she'd previously overlooked. How gate agents interacted differently with passengers of different races. How security screening seemed more intensive for certain travelers. How customer service responses varied based on passenger appearance. More importantly, she began speaking up. When she witnessed a hotel desk clerk treating a black guest with suspicion, she intervened. When she saw airport security disproportionately targeting travelers of color, she filed complaints. Her silence at Gate A12 had taught her that neutrality in the face of injustice is complicity. 6 months after the gate, a 12 incident, the transformation of SkyWave Airlines was evident in every aspect of their operations. Passenger satisfaction scores had reached record highs. Employee retention had improved dramatically, and the company's stock had not only recovered, but reached new heights as investors recognized the long-term value of authentic corporate social responsibility. The SkyWave model had become a case study in crisis response and corporate transformation. Business schools added the incident to their curricula not as an example of public relations management, but as a demonstration of how leadership under pressure reveals character and creates opportunity for meaningful change. Other airlines, initially critical of SkyWave's response as excessive, found themselves adopting similar policies as passengers began demanding the same standards across the industry. Delta implemented passenger dignity training. United established discrimination complaint escalation procedures. Southwest created bias intervention protocols. The ripple effects extended beyond aviation. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and service companies across the country began examining their own customer service practices through the lens of equity and dignity. The phrase Gate A12 moment entered corporate vocabulary as shorthand for discrimination incidents that required immediate comprehensive response. Dr. Williams's MIT keynote, delivered the day after the Phoenix incident, became one of the most watched business presentations in recent history. She spoke about cardiac innovation for 30 minutes and institutional change for 15, but it was the final 5 minutes that resonated most powerfully. Yesterday, I experienced discrimination on my own airline. Today, I stand before you not as a victim of that discrimination, but as someone empowered to prevent it from happening to others. That's the difference between individual achievement and institutional change. Individual achievement helps you climb the ladder. Institutional change rebuilds the ladder so others can climb it too. The Passenger Dignity Fund, initially established with $5 million, grew to over $20 million as other companies and individuals contributed to supporting travelers facing discrimination. The fund provided legal assistance, documentation services, and educational resources, creating a support network that extended far beyond SkyWave's operations. Leo Martinez, a young Latino man who had experienced discrimination on a competing airline, used the fund's resources to document his case and pursue legal action. His successful lawsuit led to policy changes at 3 major carriers and a settlement that funded bias training programs across the industry. Sarah Kim, a Korean-American business traveler, used the fund's support to create a mobile app that allowed passengers to report discrimination incidents in real time, complete with location data, witness information, and automatic legal documentation. The app became a powerful tool for accountability and pattern recognition. The most significant long-term impact was cultural. The phrase "you don't belong here" became harder to say and impossible to defend. Service industry employees knew that discrimination incidents would be documented, shared, and investigated. Passengers knew they had allies and resources if they faced mistreatment. Dr. Williams often reflected on the choice she'd made at Gate A12 to let the discrimination play out completely rather than revealing her identity immediately. It would have been easier to flash her CEO credentials and end the humiliation quickly, but easy solutions don't create lasting change. Comfort is the enemy of progress, she told a reporter months later. If I had made that situation comfortable for myself, I would have made it comfortable for discrimination to continue happening to others. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let injustice expose itself completely before you dismantle it. The Phoenix Sky Harbor terminal looked exactly the same as Dr. Zoe Williams walked through it on a Tuesday morning in October. But everything felt different. Gate A12 had become an unofficial landmark for SkyWave employees, a reminder of the day their company chose transformation over defensiveness. The gate agent she passed smiled genuinely, the kind of warmth that comes from working for a company that aligns with your values rather than contradicting them. Zoe was returning from another MIT presentation, this one about the intersection of technology and social justice, when she noticed a familiar face at the boarding desk. Brandon Walsh had completed his bias training and been reassigned to Phoenix operations, specifically requesting the assignment. He wanted to work at the gate where he'd learned the cost of silence. "Doctor," Williams Brandon said as she approached, his voice carrying genuine respect rather than nervous recognition. "Welcome aboard. Your seat is ready, and I wanted you to know we've had 6 months without a single discrimination complaint at this gate." Zoe nodded, appreciating both the information and the pride in his voice. "How many interventions?" 12, Brandon replied without hesitation. 12 times we've seen behavior that might escalate into discrimination, and 12 times we've addressed it immediately. Early intervention, just like you taught us. The phrase "just like you taught us" would have been impossible 6 months ago. Then Zoe was an unknown passenger being discriminated against by her own employees. Now she was a teacher whose hardest lesson had been learned through public humiliation and corporate transformation. As she settled into seat 2, the same seat she'd been denied 6 months earlier, Zoe thought about the journey from that moment of discrimination to this moment of respect. The transformation hadn't been easy or comfortable, but it had been complete. A flight attendant approached, young professional and notably diverse in a way that reflected SkyWave's new hiring priorities. "Dr. Williams, I'm Marcus Thompson, and I wanted to thank you personally. I'm one of the new hires from the Passenger Dignity Initiative. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been considered for this position. Today, I'm here because you turned your worst day into our best opportunity." As Flight 447 climbed into the Arizona sky following the same route as that transformative flight 6 months earlier, Dr. Williams reflected on what the Gate A12 incident had taught her about power prejudice and the possibility of change. The most important lesson wasn't about discrimination. She'd understood that evil long before becoming its target at her own company. The revelation was about complicity, about how good people's silence enables bad people's actions, and how institutions can harbor bias even when led by people committed to equality. Brandon Walsh's silence hadn't been malicious. Patricia Henderson's hesitation hadn't been hateful. Stephen Parker's backing of discrimination hadn't been consciously racist. But the cumulative effect of all that well-meaning inaction had been a company culture where Melissa Rodriguez felt comfortable demanding extra proof from passengers of color, while passengers like William Carter had to intervene to defend basic dignity. The phone in her hand buzzed with a message from Nina. Latest data passenger complaints down 89% industry-wide. Bias incident reports up 340%. Because people are finally reporting them. The accountability you created is spreading. Zoe smiled at the numbers, but more than statistics, she thought about faces. Leo Martinez, whose discrimination case had been won with Dignity Fund support. Sarah Kim, whose app was preventing discrimination by making it immediately documentable. Marcus Thompson, the flight attendant serving passengers with respect because he'd been hired into a culture that demanded it. Real change didn't happen through policy manuals or sensitivity training alone. It happened when someone with power chose to use that power on behalf of people who didn't have it. When someone with a platform chose to amplify voices that had been silenced. When someone with privilege chose to dismantle the systems that had given them that privilege unfairly. Dr. Williams had built SkyWave Airlines to be different from the companies that had discriminated against her. But building different institutions wasn't enough if they could still harbor old prejudices. The real work was in creating cultures where discrimination couldn't survive, where silence in the face of injustice was impossible, where dignity was non-negotiable. The young flight attendant, Marcus, stopped by her seat again. "Dr. Williams, there's a passenger in economy who's nervous about flying. First time. He's wondering if you'd mind saying hello. He recognizes you from the news coverage and says you give him courage." Zoe unbuckled her seatbelt immediately. "Of course." Walking back to economy class, she passed passengers of every background, all treated with identical respect by a crew that had learned the cost of anything less. The nervous passenger was a teenager, probably traveling alone for the first time, clearly from a working-class background based on his carefully chosen but inexpensive clothes. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Zoe. I hear this is your first flight." The young man's face lit up. "Yes, ma'am. I'm heading to college, first in my family. I saw what you did at the airport, how you stood up for yourself and changed things for everybody. It made me think maybe I can do that too in my own way." Zoe sat down beside him for a moment. "What's your name?" "David." "David Martinez?" "Well, David Martinez, the most important thing I learned is that change doesn't require perfect courage. It just requires refusing to accept that things have to stay the way they are. You're already doing that by being the first in your family to go to college." As Dr. Williams returned to her seat, she thought about all the David Martinezes in the world, young people whose potential could be unlocked or limited by how they were treated in moments of vulnerability. Travelers who shouldn't have to wonder whether their race would affect their service. Employees who shouldn't have to choose between keeping their jobs and speaking up against discrimination. The gate. A 12 incident had ended with corporate accountability and policy changes, but the real work was ongoing and personal. It was happening every time a gate agent chose to treat every passenger with equal respect. Every time a fellow passenger spoke up instead of staying silent. Every time a company chose transparency over defensiveness when confronted with discrimination. Dr. Williams opened her laptop and began writing not a corporate memo or policy document, but a letter to be published in business journals and shared across social media. 6 months ago, I was discriminated against by my own employees while cameras rolled and the world watched. Today, I'm writing from the same seat on the same route served by employees who understand that their job isn't just moving passengers from point A to point B. Their job is protecting human dignity during the journey. That transformation didn't happen because of corporate policies or legal requirements. It happened because individuals chose to be better, because witnesses chose to speak up, because employees chose courage over comfort, because a company chose accountability over defensiveness. Every day in airports and hotels and restaurants and retail stores across this country, someone faces discrimination. Someone is told they don't belong. Someone is treated as less than human because of how they look or where they come from. And every day there are bystanders who can choose to intervene or stay silent. Employees who can choose to perpetuate bias or dismantle it. Leaders who can choose transformation or status quo. The question isn't whether discrimination exists. It does. The question is what you'll do when you encounter it. Will you be Melissa Rodriguez, using your position to exclude Stephen Parker, prioritizing comfort over justice? Or Brandon Walsh, learning from mistakes and committing to change? The choice is always yours. Choose dignity. Choose courage. Choose the belief that everyone belongs. Because the next time someone says you don't belong here, the world is watching, and the world is learning from your response. Dr. Williams closed her laptop as Flight 447 began its descent into Boston. Through her window, she could see the city where she'd earned her Ph.D., where she'd first dreamed of building something better than what existed. She'd built that better thing, not perfectly, not permanently, but authentically. And in building it, she'd learned that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or revenge. It's becoming the change you want to see in the world, one interaction, one choice, one moment of courage at a time.